There are wounds that never fade, only scars the earth remembers. Once, this island of paradise burned from within, not by foreign hands, but by its own sons and daughters. This is the story of the JVP insurrection, Sri Lanka's war within. It began with a dream. The Janatha Vimukti Peramuna, the People's Liberation Front, promised equality and justice for the poor. Young, charismatic, and educated, its leader, Rohana Wajawara, galvanized a generation of disillusioned youth who felt left behind by the post-colonial establishment. They demanded radical change, a socialist Sri Lanka free from what they saw as systemic corruption and inequality. But in 1971, and then again in 1987, the dream turned red. What began as hope fermented into hatred. And from classrooms to villages, from university halls to rural farmlands, Sri Lanka descended into a spiral of fear and violence. The JVP's ideology, once a beacon for the marginalized, became the justification for a brutal armed struggle that would tear the nation apart. Between 1987 and 1989, the JVP and its armed wing, the Deshapremi Janatha Vyaparaya, or the Patriotic People's Movement, declared war on the state. Their strategy was to cripple the nation, to bring the government and the economy to its knees through systematic destruction. The cost was unimaginable. Public transportation, the lifeblood of the people, was a primary target. Over 553 buses were set ablaze, leaving behind skeletal remains on the country's roads. The railway network was savaged. 16 trains and 24 stations were destroyed, severing connections between communities. The nation was plunged into darkness as 132 power transformers and 69 power lines were blown apart. Government infrastructure was systematically dismantled. 15 bus depots, 76 police houses, and 113 government vehicles were reduced to ashes. Roads, bridges, and public services, the very fabric of a functioning society, were crippled. The engines of the state ground to a halt, not by accident, but by a deliberate campaign of sabotage. The bill for this destruction ran into billions of rupees, a debt that would take decades to repay. But the financial cost paled in comparison to the human toll. More than 35,000 people were killed. The number is staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. Some were killed by insurgents for defying their orders or for being labeled as informants. Others were eliminated by state-backed death squads in a brutal counterinsurgency campaign. Entire families vanished in the night, their fates unknown to this day. Students were abducted from their dorms, their potential extinguished. Journalists were silenced for daring to report the truth. In this chaotic and merciless war, the line between victim and aggressor blurred until it was almost invisible. It was a time of bhishanaya, a reign of terror where no one was safe. Fear became the currency of daily life, and a nation bled quietly, trapped between two unforgiving forces. They were artists, thinkers, monks, voices that once defined a generation. Their loss created a vacuum in the cultural and intellectual soul of the nation. Vijaya Kumaratunga, the beloved actor who became the people's hope for peace, was gunned down in broad daylight in 1988. His call for a negotiated settlement was seen as a betrayal by the extremists. Premakeerthi de Alwis, the brilliant lyricist who gave a nation its melodies, was dragged from his home and killed for singing too loud, his words deemed a threat. Sagarika Gomes, the smiling face of television news, was abducted and murdered. Her crime? Reading the government news bulletin during a JVP-enforced strike. She was silenced forever for doing her job. Thevis Guruj, the pioneering broadcaster and the first Sinhala voice of Radio Ceylon, was executed for refusing to stop the broadcast, for upholding the principle that the airwaves belonged to the people. Dr. Gladys Jayawardene, a distinguished woman of science and the chairman of the State Pharmaceutical Corporation, was murdered for serving her people by ensuring medicine remained available during the strikes. The list goes on. Lionel Jayadilake, a cabinet minister. Harsha Jayawardene, the chairman of the ruling party. Chandratne Patuwathavithane, a university vice-chancellor. Even the clergy were not spared. Voices of peace, who spoke against bloodshed from all sides, paid the ultimate price. The venerable monks, Kotikawate Sadatisa Thero, Hegoda Indrasara Thero, and Pohadaramule Pemaloka Thero, were all assassinated. Their calls for compassion were answered with bullets. Fear ruled the night. The JVP ordered strikes and curfews, enforced through posters that warned, "Death to the defiant." Shops that opened were bombed. Workers who went to their jobs were executed. The government responded with its own terror. Unmarked vans prowled the streets, operated by death squads that acted with impunity. Between these two fires, the people had nowhere to hide. Young men were dragged from their homes, often on the basis of a mere suspicion, never to be seen again. Mothers and wives spent their days waiting at police stations, army camps, and morgues, searching for loved ones who would never return. Trust evaporated. Neighbors suspected neighbors. Friends feared friends. It was a time of whispers and shadows, where a single wrong word could mean a death sentence. So, who is to blame? For decades, this question has haunted Sri Lanka. The government pointed to the JVP, labeling them as ruthless terrorists who hijacked a legitimate social cause for a violent power grab. The JVP, in turn, blamed the oppressive and corrupt regime, arguing they were forced into rebellion by state violence and a system that offered them no future. International human rights groups accused both sides of committing horrific atrocities, documenting extrajudicial killings, torture, and disappearances carried out by state forces and insurgents alike. The truth, as it so often does, lies buried beneath decades of silence, political denial, and the unmarked graves that still litter the island's landscape. The answers are complex, painful, and resisted by those who have a stake in forgetting. Eventually, the guns fell silent. The capture and execution of the JVP leadership in late 1989 marked the end of the second insurrection. In the years that followed, the JVP re-emerged, renouncing armed struggle and re-entering the world of democracy, seeking change through ballots, not bullets. Sri Lanka began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. New roads were paved over the old, scarred ones. Bridges were reconstructed. Buses returned to the roads, and children returned to schools. But the scars remain. Every rebuilt bridge, every new building, every smiling face carries the memory of loss. A generation was lost to the violence, a wound in the nation's collective memory. It was a brutal lesson, paid for in blood. The red shadow still lingers in our history, a somber reminder of how quickly a society can turn upon itself. But the island has risen again, demonstrating a resilience born from immense suffering. The story of those lost years must be remembered, not to reignite old hatreds, but to learn, to heal, and to ensure it never happens again. May the people of Sri Lanka never again turn their hands against one another. May we remember the past, not with hate, but with wisdom, and work together to protect the future. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a difficult chapter of history. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more documentaries that explore the stories that shape our world. Remember to like...
Good morning to my laundry!